encourage you to sort of move in towards the center because we're going to be using some visual aids this morning in the presentation of this plan. The preliminary plan for the Riverside area, which our speaker will present this morning, is in a real way evidence of student, faculty, and administration involvement, participation, and concern for the community around us. For the past 3 administrations, student society presidents have appointed a student society representative to the Cedar-Riverside Area Council, which is an organization made up of representatives of business, resident groups, education, service, medical, and religious institutions in the area. In the spring of 1965, the Cedar-Riverside Area Council voted to request the Minneapolis Planning Commission do a comprehensive plan of our area, a plan which would complement the people and the institutions occupying the area in the future, a plan which would provide continuity and purpose and direction for our area. The Minneapolis Planning Commission accepted our challenge and directed the Minneapolis Planning Department to do an analysis of the Riverside area, pointing out the problems, the needs, the challenges, and the opportunities of our area. Following the analysis report, the Minneapolis Planning Department solicited goals and institutional plans from the groups represented on the Cedar-Riverside Area Council. A student planning and goals committee was appointed. The committee interviewed students and student groups on and off campus for imaginative goals for our area. These goals are articulated and sent to the Minneapolis Planning Department by way of the Cedar-Riverside Area Council. The preliminary plan, which we have before us today, is comprehensive and takes into account the goals and plans of the groups and institutions represented on the Cedar-Riverside Area Council. It is a professional work which gives imaginative plans and imaginative alternatives and suggestions for the development of our area. Tonight at 7 p.m. in the faculty lounge, we will have a conversation and discussion hour concerning this proposed plan. Our speaker, Mr. Peterson, will return at that time. Mr. Fossey, administration representative on the Cedar-Riverside Area Council, and others have been invited as conversationalists. I would encourage all of you to attend and to participate in the discussion and details of this plan. Certainly it concerns every one of you. Those of you who plan to attend tonight, please pick up a copy of the plan at the door as you leave. We have analysis reports which look like this, and we have the regular Riverside the next 20 years, which looks like this. They'll be available at the door. Should we run out, there's a book over there, and please sign up your name and address. One will be sent to you from the planning department. Our speaker this morning comes to us from the Minneapolis Planning Department, where he is employed as a senior planner in that agency with a specific assignment to the Riverside area. Mr. Peterson is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, where he received his BA in architecture in 1962. He's received his master's degree from the University of Wisconsin in 1965 in urban and regional planning. Before joining the Minneapolis Planning Department, he worked for the state planning agency in Wisconsin and with the city planner in Bloomington, Minnesota. Mr. Peterson has been particularly concerned in developing the plan presented here today. It is our pleasure and our privilege to have with us this morning Mr. Barry Peterson.
Thank you, Ron. This is mostly going to be a visual aid sort of talk. I'm not going to try to get you to understand this preliminary plan report in this hour or 45 minutes that I have. I'm going to hit a few of the highlights, explain to you the procedure that we're going through, show you a few pictures to keep you from going to sleep from listening to my voice. Could someone over there in the far end of the auditorium flick off the lights for me? We start out here with a shot that shows the relationship of this neighborhood to the rest of Minneapolis. If I can get my grease pencil working, I'll make some marks on it. This area right in here is our primary area of concern, Riverside Neighborhood. It's a part of a larger community called the University community, outlined the dark line. The balance of this area is called Southeast Minneapolis. I'm going to refer to the dichotomy, if you will, later on between Southeast, this larger area, and Riverside Neighborhood. Can you hear me if I let the mic hang? Good. This map shows some of the sub-areas that we've delineated in Riverside Neighborhood. Major boundary occurring right here along Cedar Avenue. The institutional areas will eventually occupy this very major segment in the heart of this neighborhood. We have a balance of Bluff Street, Seven Corners, West Cedar, South Riverside, and Riverside Park. Ordinarily, I'd leave this slide on while I show you a few 35mm color slides to give us a sort of a familiarity in what we're dealing with. I'd like to show you now a few slides of some of the existing structures in Riverside Neighborhood. We'll start out with a few commercial structures. This is Cedar Avenue commercial strip from 7th Street looking to the north. This is from 6th Street looking north. A lot of truck traffic early in the morning. Looking north from 5th Street. Another view in the same area. This is looking south from 5th. This is the existing commercial community that we have here. It's looking south from about 4th Street. This is the opposite side of the street, looking south. This is looking north between 3rd and 4th Street up towards Seven Corners up here. This is Seven Corners looking back to the south, Cedar Avenue, 15th Avenue out here. This is Washington Avenue at 14th, looking toward the university. This is 15th Avenue. Fifteenth Avenue again. This will be the boundary of the neighborhood eventually. The freeway is going to come right about in this area, right to that, about that line. Riverside Avenue, looking over towards St. Paul from the bank. At 19th Avenue, looking toward Augsburg. Sorry. This is at 20th Avenue, looking back towards Cedar. I should add parenthetically here that none of these structures will be affected by the programmed freeway expansion or institutional expansion. 25th and Riverside. These are some other structures. This is across the street from the senior citizens' apartments on 6th and 16th. This is on 16th Ave. This is 16th Avenue looking toward 4th Street. 16th Avenue near 4th Street, about 2 houses off. There's a converted residence on 5th Street. This is again across the street from the senior citizens, across 7th Street this time. This will be just within the freeway boundary when it's completed. This is across 7th Street and will remain. This is 16th Avenue, about a half a block from Cedar High. This is 6th, between 15th and 16th. This is 5th, between 15th and 16th Avenues. 15th Avenue at 6th, I believe. This is directly across the street from the senior citizens on 6th. 5th Street, as it says. This is 5th and 15th Avenue. This is a 5-unit converted store. This is the South Riverside area, which is directly to the west of the Augsburg campus, between the Augsburg campus and Cedar, the future Augsburg campus and Cedar Avenue. 2-block strip between 20th and Cedar, and roughly from Riverside out to where the freeway is coming across. 19th Avenue again, the west side. Now the east side looking north. This is one of the new student apartments. 19th Avenue. I believe this is 6th Street, between 19th and 20th. This is the Riverside Park area, 7th Street looking out toward Riverside Park, St. Paul there in the background. Riverside Park again. Some more shots of housing in this area. This is on 8th at about 26th, I think, 27th. Another, this would fall in the census category of dilapidated housing. I point that out because we'll talk about it a little later on. This is a fairly expensive sort of thing to correct. You'll notice the chimney is in very bad shape. It would involve a considerable amount of money to fix up, so it falls in what's called dilapidated condition. Now, to show you that I haven't been showing you the extremes, I'm showing you one of the newer buildings in the area, one of about half a dozen, just over half a dozen newer apartment buildings. And I'll show you a couple of the 18 condemned units. I'd like to move now back to the transparency section for a little while. This is a result of one of the surveys that we did. We surveyed the existing land use in this neighborhood in September, categorized it into one of the 8 categories you see here, and then plotted it. There are only 2 points I want to make on this map. One is the extreme intermixture of uses that occurs roughly west of 19th Avenue. This area was originally developed beginning in about the mid-1850s, in a time when it was not considered necessary or desirable, or perhaps nobody had ever thought about it, to separate residential uses from commercial or from industrial. They existed side by side in sort of a mutually incompatible relationship. The net result of that sort of intermixture, I think we see very clearly in this area that we call West Cedar right now. The other point I'd like to make is that this category of land is extremely large. You'll note that really a very substantial proportion of this map is white, which means that it's in transportation, streets, and alleys. We can point that out with figures using this table. See that in 65, 146 acres here in just road right-of-way for a full 33% of the total land area, 51 acres in other transportation. That includes railroads, parking lots, truck terminals for another 12%, which means that we have a full 45% of the land in this area devoted to transportation in one form or another. Most of this land not paying taxes, the streets, of course, requiring maintenance. Sometimes you wonder if they get it. We'll come back and look at some of these figures a little later on another table. I'd like to talk very briefly about condition of housing. This is the category of the house I showed you before with the bad roof, dilapidated. You'll note here in Minneapolis we have 3.3% in 1960 on the average. In southeast Minneapolis, that's just across the river, 9%. Riverside as a whole, 17%. We break this down, yeah, it's bad. We break this down further and we see that east of Cedar, we have something less than the combined average, and in west of Cedar, of course, we have something considerably more than the combined average. In summary, what this amounts to, shown in this table, this area here, in 1960, the rate of deterioration in Riverside neighborhood was 3 times the rate in either Minneapolis as a whole or in southeast Minneapolis. The rate of dilapidation, the worst condition, was 3 times the rate in southeast and 5 times the rate in Minneapolis. Before I continue, I should say a little bit about this particular table here. Some 92% of the housing units in this neighborhood were built before 1903. By itself, this doesn't particularly mean anything. There are a lot of 100-year-old structures that are still standing and are in good condition. This is complicated in Riverside, though, by the fact that this area was built up as a rental area for immigrant workmen. This was its function, to house the fellows that came over from northern and central Europe to work in our flour mills, our lumber mills, cooperage factories, and so forth. So the quality was not put into it. Even at its peak, home ownership in Riverside did not exceed 25% of the units. Now, as a check on this data in this area, because one could immediately say, well, that's a 1960 census, we did a study which is summarized in this section of the report. We surveyed building permit activity in Riverside neighborhood between 1955 and 1965. We discovered that the average amount spent on rehabilitation was $42 per residential structure in Riverside. When we took the period post-census, we discovered that the amount fell to $27. Now, to get some sort of a scale against which to measure this, we also surveyed the activity in Harrison neighborhood, which you may or may not know has been the subject of a city-assisted rehabilitation project. And as you can see by the table, the average there came out to $307 per structure. This is exacerbated by the fact that Harrison neighborhood was newer and in better condition than Riverside is now. So I think we can clearly see that Riverside as a whole has not spent the volume of money necessary to rehabilitate itself, either before or after the 1960 census. But really the most important fact for you, and I think for me, is summed up in this line. There are only going to be 900 private housing units in this neighborhood after the programmed freeway and institutional expansion occur. You can compare this with about 2,100 right now. And this is complicated by the fact that we have, according to the institution's projections, we have about these increases of populations coming up. This may go right back off the seats pretty soon. Between 65 and 1980, the student populations are going to more than quadruple, associated with the 4 educational institutions in this area. The staff going to increase by just over 60% from 3,400 to about 5,700. We've done a preliminary analysis of this and estimated the potential demand for housing, and we come up with this sort of a preliminary estimate, taking the full potential demand and subtracting for each 5-year increment the number of units that are going to be built, mainly dormitory units, dormitory and some staff graduate student units. Subtract these from the full total, break them down by population per housing units, by type of population, student, non-student, this sort of thing. We end up with these 4 figures by 5-year period for the potential demand for housing units, apartment type units in Riverside neighborhood. There's, as you can see here, I told you there were about 2,300 units in 65. There's an excess of potential demand that's not being met. I think that's fairly apparent. The increase in this period is fairly low, largely because of the tremendous increase in dormitory units. There's a fairly substantial increase from 70 to 75. And there's a considerable increase from 75 to 80. Now, whether or not this neighborhood could ever hold 7,200 apartment units plus 5,700 dormitory units is somewhat questionable. It's been done in other cities, but so far it hasn't been done in this area. The brown areas are the areas we're suggesting for the apartment type non-institutional housing. You'll see how they compare with this area, which is presently the densest area that we have in Minneapolis. This whole area between roughly Lyndale, 11th Avenue, Grant Street, and Franklin now holds 7,200 housing units. You can see that it's a substantially larger area than the pieces that we're talking about here in Riverside. We require very careful attention to environmental design and site design to get the number of units in that the potential demand apparently exists for, or will exist for, according to our preliminary estimates. In no sense would the area ever hold, nor would the market support the full number of units that would be allowed by R6 zoning. Before I go on, I'd like to switch back to slides briefly to show you what I'm talking about when I talk about this high-density sort of housing for Riverside neighborhood. The only way I can problems, Ernie? Push the wide bar at the bottom there in the back. Thank you. I'm going to show you some examples taken from different cities, both in Europe and in the United States. This is a model of an urban sort of development in Rotterdam. It's called the Lindebaan. It combines commercial activity. This is a commercial street here. Now, in a very real sense, it's not at all the same thing as we would think of when we think of a commercial street, because there are absolutely no cars in this area. The area is flanked by high-volume streets. The service streets penetrate around the back of the shops for service, but no traffic penetrates into this pedestrian precinct. This is a principle that I think is important in Riverside neighborhood. The other principle shown by this model is the combination of high-rise, high-density housing in this commercial area, in association with this commercial area. Also open space that you see nearby. I'll show you a few shots of what this looked like when it was built. There's somewhat of a similarity, as you notice. Here, a high-rise apartment building over a block of shops, the sidewalk cafe, flowers, that sort of thing. This was taken fairly early in the morning, so there are not many people in it right now. few more shots in Rotterdam now. Another high-rise over shops. Note the pavement texture. This is later on in the day. About the same time of day. These are apartment units up here, incidentally. Apartment building again. It's a walk-up and a high-rise. This is an example of the preservation of an old building in association with a completely modern development. Provides a focal point, in fact, for this whole development. This is Coventry, England. It's a two-level shopping center. You see a pedestrian underpass coming through here. Note that they aren't satisfied with gray concrete even on the sides of the pedestrian underpass. See up here the start of the two-level shopping area. Coventry Cathedral there in the background. A lot of shoppers. It's a busy, active sort of place. There's a sidewalk speaker. This is a small rebuilt shopping center in a small English town called Bradford-on-Avon. Another shot of the same center, looking the other direction. This is a shot taken in Copenhagen. High-rise apartments in association with commercial. This is a roof garden. Restaurant actually there. Another shot of it. Shopping down below again. This is a suburb of Stockholm. A well-used sort of plaza in a shopping area with a high-rise building in the background. The same center. Note the pavement texture. People using the benches. This is a small, very small Swedish shopping center. It's being used. You'll notice the bicycle park. Most of the people have used the bicycle park. You always find some people that don't. This is these are a few shots of the new English town of Cumbernauld, high-rise, walk-up buildings in association. I've included a couple shots of the recreational areas for younger children. This one and the following. Not an unpleasant sort of a place, even though it's built on the plain. Again, walk-up elevator buildings. These buildings are in the Swedish suburb of Farsta. Walk-up and high-rise. This is a shot of a townhouse elevator building complex in San Francisco. It's actually a picture of a picture. I have to apologize. This is another shot of walk-up elevator development in San Francisco. This is an example of public housing built hard by the London docks. It's about a stone's throw from the Thames River. Walk-up buildings and elevator. This is an example taken from Philadelphia, townhouses and elevator buildings. This is an example of townhouses in Cleveland, Ohio. This example is from New Haven, Connecticut. This is faculty housing for the Chicago Theological Seminary. I thought you might be interested. These are some shots taken in Reston, Virginia, the new town outside Washington, 2 springs ago while it was in the reasonably early stages of construction. The townhouse units surrounding the elevator building. Another shot. And another. Actually, a fairly attractive area. Personally, I don't think I'd mind living there. This example, or this series of examples, is taken from Portland, Oregon. Low-rise buildings and high. Again, low and high. Downtown Portland in the background. Benches being used here. It's a green area, not at all unattractive. Low-rise or walk-up buildings, townhouses flanking the walkway into the high-rise building. Plaza there in the center that we'll see here, looking out over Portland. This is a fountain that's in this development. And so is that, because I like water. We'll switch back briefly now to a few more transparencies. Well, it says land use plan, and then there's some more on the bottom. As a means of meeting all of these competing demands for land, necessity for the institutions expanding, the need for housing for the populations associated with them, the need for parking, the need for commercial space to serve these facilities, we've developed this preliminary land use plan. The institutional areas, I need some glue. Institutional areas fall largely within, excuse me, I left out Augsburg College. That line. And as you can see, within the institutional areas, there are several different classifications of land. There's what I consider to be the more academic sort of areas, the recreational areas, parking, institutional housing, and so forth. Outside, we again see these brown areas that we pointed out earlier. Incidentally, these areas below this line are actually in what's called Seward Neighborhood. From about here on to the west now, this is a rehabilitation project. This shopping area is going to be rehabilitated, some new shops and so forth, as you probably all know. We're suggesting this as a sort of a medical commercial area. It might have the same sort of thing that it has there now, a boutique, art gallery, maybe a sidewalk cafe. Up here we're suggesting a neighborhood sort of shopping center, small shops oriented to the needs of the people living in this area and associated with the institutions that come in from day to day. The Seven Corners area we're suggesting as a sort of a more, having more metropolitan appeal, different kinds of specialties that might attract people from throughout the metropolitan area, nighttime entertainment, for example. We're also suggesting by this pattern that there could well be some housing associated with this project. Without going into detail, I'll show you some of the consequences that would flow from the adoption of a plan that looked about like that. First of all, we would have about the same amount of purely residential land. We would add 11 acres of institutional residential and 11 acres and 7 corners of what we call commercial residential. The purely commercial area would fall from 12 to 9 acres. However, we would add 11 acres in the commercial residential category, so we would also have an increase in commercial space available. The industrial wholesale warehouse we're suggesting should be moved entirely out of Riverside into the industry square, the upper harbor area, and so forth. The big expansion occurs in this area, the institutional park, open space, and that category. We have a drop-off in vacant land. We're assuming that none of it will be vacant. One of our successes, I think, is the considerable reduction in the amount of land devoted to road right-of-way and other transportation uses. We drop in percentage from a total of 45 down to 28, which is a very substantial drop. I suppose it almost sounds like we're getting something for nothing here. That's not strictly true. One of the reasons why we can have the same amount of residential land and more institutional land is, of course, as I told you just a minute ago, we're suggesting the commercial or the industrial wholesale uses be relocated outside the neighborhood. Another reason is that we pick up 23.4 acres that are now in streets. This, of course, has a couple effects. One is that it reduces the mileage of streets from 15 to about 5, considerably reducing the maintenance cost to the city. It presumably would get this land back on the tax rolls, so it would be paying revenue. It also allows for the sort of development that we're suggesting, this mixed density residential development, the larger blocks of land that could be developed in one piece. Another one of the effects that could flow from this suggested plan is that the taxes could increase substantially. In 1962, the full and true value of all property, land and buildings in Riverside amounted to $5,157,000. Now, the relationship between full and true and market value is that full and true is about a third of market value. That means that according to the City Assessor's Department, Riverside was worth 3 times this figure, or about $15.5 million in 62, taxes payable in 63. Now, if we had only 1,033 housing units in this neighborhood, an average market value, land and building, of $15,000 each, which is fairly low for type 1 construction, we could exceed the total full and true valuation for the neighborhood in 1962. This may bore you, but it interests other people tremendously. Now, if we had 7,000 new units, we'd get, by logical process, over 7 times the amount of revenue that was returned in 1963. But perhaps more interesting is the fact that we could maintain revenue at the 1963 level if only $57 per year per unit in taxes or payment in lieu of taxes was paid. This would support the city, the school board, the county, and the state at the 1963 level of payments. And of course, there's a wide range between these two extremes. I'd like to turn right now to a brief consideration of traffic problems. I drove here this morning too. This table shows the 1985 weekday person trips one way to or from University Riverside. Now we're including the east bank of the university as well. By 1985, we're going to have about 71,500 people associated in these categories with major institutions in this area. Now, these people on the average weekday will make about 91,600 person trips in vehicles. I haven't said bus or car or truck or anything. I'm not sure. I don't know what the modal split is. Now, if we get the dormitory and about the number of apartment units in Riverside that we've suggested, there would be about 49,000 walking or bicycling trips. We get fewer units, we get less walking, bicycling trips, and more vehicle trips, of course. This poses some pretty substantial problems for this area. This is a sort of a flow chart, proportional width, that indicates how this part of this traffic projection would come out. This thickness right in here represents about the volume of traffic that now goes on Lake Street north of Lake Calhoun. This represents 30,000 cars across the New Washington Avenue Bridge, 20,000 cars on Cedar, which is about a 1/3 increase, 10,000 on Riverside Avenue, 3,000 on West River Road. Freeway here will carry about 41,000, so you can see there are going to be some very substantial increases in traffic. You can't because I didn't show you the 64 map, but you can take my word for it. Now, to meet these traffic needs, not only the needs of the neighborhood, but of the whole metropolitan area, we've developed this proposed circulation network. Strip it right down to the bare bones to start with. These dotted lines, as you can see, represent the pedestrian cycleway that we're suggesting. You've got to have some way of carrying these 49,000 trips if we get these housing units. And the street system has been paired to the point where your more direct routes are going to require a pedestrian cycle system looking something like this, connecting Riverside with Seward neighborhood out here to the south, with Industry Square, via this bridge through Washington Avenue, and with the East Bank area. We're suggesting a pedestrian bridge here connecting a major residential complex with the commercial area. We're suggesting that consideration be given to reserving these two spots as transit stops, at least for a while. We're suggesting this development of, or I should say retention, of arterial streets, Franklin Avenue, Cedar, Washington, 10th Avenue Bridge, or Cedar Avenue Bridge, both to continue the existing arterial network and to function as continuations of existing truck routes in the city. They're needed streets. You'll note that Riverside Avenue was absent under the arterial classification. We're suggesting very strongly that Riverside become a collector and that it be broken at that point in between here and here. I won't go into any detail on this. It's developed quite well, I think, in the report. Another one of the things is that we strongly suggest that 20th Avenue not run across in this direction. Preserve this primarily as an access to Augsburg College and the hospitals. We're also suggesting this network of local service streets to provide access to property, just assuming, of course, that developers would be able to buy up all of the affected properties at equitable prices. And we're also suggesting this extension of West River Road up along the river, eventually to come out near the post office. I'd like to turn now to a consideration of a couple of the alternatives that we presented in the report. This report is primarily intended to stir thinking and discussion, get people to decide what they would like to see in their neighborhood, what they want to see happen. And as an aid, we're presenting different alternatives to show that we believe in the concept of alternatives. This alternative, one in this first set, represents a continuation of Washington Avenue, Cedar, 15th Avenue along their present alignments. Construction of some traffic islands to channel traffic and try and carry the volumes of traffic that this intersection is going to be carrying over by the next 15 years. It relocates existing Washington Avenue, or actually closes it, would relocate the entrance to the university up to this point to avoid this snake movement that would back up traffic quite badly. Well, that's still marked up. The second alternative you saw on the proposed plan involves a relocation of Washington Avenue to bring it out here at a right angle to existing Washington Avenue, provide a direct shot into the university. Involves a one-way pair flanking the 10th Avenue Bridge to provide service here, provide access down to the riverbank, some of the university area, the parking area here. This third alternative is included to show what happens when you apply the constraint of disturbing existing structures along Washington Avenue the least while still providing more or less direct route into the university. It develops an infeasible sort of traffic movement that is about as bad as the existing one. So it would be very low priority. The second set, I'm not going to go into any detail on right now, involves this area where we recommend closing Riverside. The alternative is that Riverside continue and that we bring out 8th Street at a right angle to clean it up as much as possible within that sort of constraint. This would envision a relocation of Sevilla Triangle somewhat to the northwest and put it in association with the boutique art gallery, sidewalk cafe sort of development in the commercial block. This alternative for West Cedar is predicated on the senior citizens, the Housing Authority, being able to expand this site to include this area in here, which includes existing 7th Street. Somebody's going to hear about this. Includes existing 7th Street and this very narrow strip here between 7th Street and the freeway, which is really virtually unusable. This alternative, I think, would be recommended only if the Housing Authority is absolutely unable to utilize this land. The last set, I think, are perhaps closer to your concerns. Now, what this means is that eventually, this is where Murphy Square lies right now. As Augsburg College development proceeds, you're going to surround it. There are arguments pro and con. Also, the freeway's on this side. What we would, in essence, have is a public park so isolated that I suppose, in effect, it becomes a private park, which may or may not be bad. The suggestion really includes just a swap of land, get this park up, fronting on a public street, more in the public eye, perhaps more available to public use. Of course, we'd leave out this area where the new building is, maybe do something like that. And perhaps even leave a street through there. It's just something that's put out to be considered, discussed. After all, that's really what my being here today is all about. That's what this proposed plan report is about. It's to stimulate some thinking. These are some suggestions explained in fair detail in both of the reports that Ron showed you before we began. I would like really just to discuss with you only the entry points right now. We're going to talk about this one. We don't have any shots of that one. Washington Avenue, 10th Avenue Bridge. I'd like to move back to the slides now. Could you turn it on, Ernie, please? We'll take a look at some entry points first. This is the new Washington Avenue, looking south, the two hospitals, the park in that area. We'll just sort of sweep up to the north. The barge terminal, which we suggest be relocated up into the industrial area along the upper harbor, where it is needed to stimulate industrial growth in the city. The eventual university housing area right here. More terminal. West Bank Towers. Looking toward downtown now. And the coal piles. And here's what it looks right across the river from the coal piles, which is as neat a contrast as you could ask for, I guess. This is the 10th Avenue Bridge entry point. It's not at all expressive of the coming function of this neighborhood, and should be changed. This is the Washington Avenue entrance. Same thing applies. It's hard to tell that a university is going to lie behind that. This is the Dartmouth entrance, looking toward Riverside Park here. And a view up a little bit to the northwest, the hospitals. As we come closer along the bridge, it becomes more and more backyardish until we finally come up and see Riverside. I think it should look different in the future. This is the segment of street that we suggest closing. Developing that approximately 2 acres in Riverside, 8. Yes, I know. I don't think I am. This illustrates the idea that we extend the West River Road Parkway. This is the barge terminal area right here, the railroad bridge. This is the 10th Avenue, Cedar Avenue Bridge. Now there's a bench that exists through the barge terminal area all the way up along the side of the river, all the way up, and eventually you could come out without much difficulty at all at the 3rd Avenue Bridge. There would be some difficulty in extending a parkway beyond the 3rd Avenue Bridge because of the railroad yards in this area right here. The Upper Harbor Industrial area right up here, largely vacant and going on out of the pictures, where we suggest relocating about a dozen industrial uses from Riverside. This is a shot looking back toward the university. The parkway would come up through here somewhere, pass under the railroad bridge and the Cedar Avenue or 10th Avenue Bridge, run up by the lock, the lower lock. It's looking back toward the lower lock, the roadway that already exists in this section. A little further to the north, still looking back. It's a fairly attractive bank there, actually. I was moderately surprised to see it. As you can see now, the roadway exists on to the north. On up, goes up in that area. You can see the post office right there. This is the upper lock. This is a shot directly across the river from about where the previous one was taken. The NSP plant, the flour mills are not an unattractive site for people to see on a parkway. The Stone Arch Bridge marching across the river there, and the falls in the background, the spillway. I think a very attractive view that ought to be opened up to more of the citizens of this metropolitan area. Could we have the lights again, please? What time is it now? Ron, do we have time for questions, or does everybody have to break now? Or do you want to throw it open? It's 10:30 now. Yeah, if there are a couple questions on procedure. Just a second. Maybe I should explain the procedure a little bit, show you where we're standing. This took a little bit longer than I had planned. I think you can all see this, can't you? Right now, we're at step 7. This is a discussion period. We're throwing out this preliminary plan to stimulate thinking, discussion. We want to have the ideas of the different groups and individuals involved come back to us so we can begin step 8, the adjustments indicated, so that eventually we can move on to the public hearing required by law, and as a result of that hearing and other contacts, the adoption, rejection, or adjustment of the plan and program, and after that time, continuing evaluation and continuous review. This is not a concrete, fixed sort of plan. It's a suggestion we're throwing out. It's susceptible to change at whatever time it seems desirable to be changed. I would, if anyone has questions, perhaps we should just confine them to the steps involved in the procedure. Those of you who want to get into a little detail could come to the meeting this evening, and I'll be quite happy to talk with you as long as we both can stay awake. Are there any questions? Those of you who are coming to the meeting tonight, I would like to have you pick up copies of Riverside the next 20 years and at least have a look at them before we get together tonight. The analysis report is available. There are about 50 copies. Please take them until they run out. If you want copies of the report,